All right, welcome back to the third and for now final installment in this series. In this video, we are going to create a platform that moves along a path. There are probably a couple of other different ways you could achieve this, but there are a couple of reasons I'm using the method that we're going to use in this video. One is because once we get through it, it's pretty easy to put in place and duplicate. And the other reason is because I have yet to use the timeline feature in Construct 3 in a video on this channel. I have played around with the timeline feature before, I just have never put it in any of my videos. So this will give us a good opportunity to get familiar with the timeline feature and make a platform that follows a path. So on my screen, I have our project from our last video. I'm going to go ahead and use this same layout for our new project. I'm just going to get rid of all of these objects, and we are going to start with a brand new object. So let's double click and put in a sprite. And I'm going to make this 32 by 16 and make sure the origin point is in the middle. And then I'm going to pick I'm going to go with this green color, and I'll exit out of that. And just like we did with the other platforms that we made in the other videos, I'm going to go to behaviors, add a new behavior, and get that jump through behavior. This gives us a solid to land on, but we can also jump through it from the bottom. And while it's selected, I will rename it plat_path. All right, so like I said, we're going to create a timeline for this. So there's a couple different ways we can get our timeline. First, we can go to menu, view, bars, and down here you'll see timeline bar. And if I click on it, it gives us this floating window. And when you click and drag the window around, it gives you options of where you can put it. I'm going to actually close that and show you the other way, which is over here in our project panel. Down here under timelines, we have a folder for eases, and we have timeline 1, which is just the default timeline that for some reason is already in the project when you start a new project in Construct 3. So we could double click on it and it does the same thing. It gives us a floating window and we can place it wherever. I'm going to exit out of that and highlight this timeline 1 and just delete it. So now I want to create our own timeline. So if we right click on timelines folder and add timeline, now we can name it. And I'm going to call this path follow. If you had multiple, you could put an underscore and maybe 0, 1 or 2 or 3 or however many you have. I will leave it at that, path follow underscore 01. And then I'm going to double click to open it. And here it is. It says up here, path follow 01. And then I'm going to click and drag. And I want it down here at the bottom, but I don't want mine going all the way across. So I'm going to come up here to this one and release. And now I have this new timeline window right here, right under my layout window. I'm going to click and drag this up so we can see it. Okay, to get started on timelines, once we have it in our project, it's just there. It doesn't do anything until we attach it to something. So we have our plat path object. I'm going to put this up here, maybe right about there. And I'm actually going to move my player up to this ledge too, because we'll want to be able to jump onto it, and then it's going to go in a path around the screen. And in fact, I'm just going to go ahead and delete this ledge over here so we can use our path to go all around the screen. So our ledge path object here is what we want to move along a path, and we're going to use the timeline to do that. So we need to add this object to the timeline. So if we come down to our timeline panel down here, and on the very far left of it, we have a plus, and it says add instances to the root of this timeline. So if I click it, it gives us some options. These are all of the objects and the instances of those objects that exist in the project. I want plat path 8. So I'm going to click OK. And now our object is in the timeline. And we have two values, an X and a Y. So that's the X and Y coordinates of where it is on screen. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the timeline itself. So if we click on the timeline panel, just in a blank space, it brings up the properties over here on the left. I'm not going to discuss this top section just yet. We'll get to it in a second. I want to move down to time. Right here, time This is, and it says down here, the current time in the timeline. This red line is your playhead. And if I move it around, you can see that the time changes over here. That means wherever this red line is, wherever your playhead is, right there, I put it on 3. Over here it says 3 seconds. And then total time is where this white line is. And you can grab this and move it and shorten it or even extend it. What I like to do is change what our total time is over here. So our path for our ledge is going to take more than 5 seconds. So if I come over here and I change this to 10, that white line disappeared. And if we scroll to the right, there it is, it's at 10. And if that's not enough time, I can always add more time to the timeline. So I'll go 20, and then we can scroll over and see that it goes all the way to 20 seconds and ends. We will actually change that when we get done with our timeline. So it might make a little more sense of why we would want to set the total time. Okay, moving down to the next section, we have step. So a raw step is how many steps you can move your playhead at one time. And then steps per second is how many steps you're allowing there to be in each second. So there's 1 second. We can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So if I change this to 0.5, the playhead, when I drag it, will move in half seconds. So this can come in handy when you are working with timing things out, and you can make the timeline be a little bit more friendly to use by changing your raw step and steps per second. I'm going to move raw step back to 0.1, and that changes our steps per second to 10. Okay, those are some very basic things about the timeline. And if we come down here and we right click on the timeline panel, we have a couple of things that we can do. Scale is one of those things. Right now, I am scaled as far out as I can go. So if I go to 2, now we can only see about 3 seconds of the timeline at one time. So if you're doing something that has a lot of keyframes and changes, whether it's in animation or movement or whatever, and they happen real fast within a couple of seconds, you may want to zoom into your timeline so things don't look as congested. I'll just show you what 4 looks like. We got about 1.5 seconds that we can see at one time. I'm going to go with all the way zoomed out so I can see up to 6 seconds. So now let's go ahead and start making some changes to our timeline. First off, we have a keyframe here, and we see path plat has this black dot, and then X has this blue square, and Y has this blue square. Let's click and drag our red line out to, say, 1 second. So with our playhead here, we can come over here to this other plus symbol, and it says set keyframes. And if we click it, it gives us a new set of keyframes. Now we're only going to mess with the X and Y coordinates as to try to keep this somewhat simple as we get familiar with how the timeline works. So now that I have this new set of keyframes here, if you ever need to move a keyframe, you can just click and drag the black dot and it'll move everything underneath it. So if I dragged it out to 2.5, it drags the whole thing there. I'm going to drag it back to 1 for right now. Okay, so let's take a look at our X and Y blue squares here. These are our keyframes for our X and Y values. So if I click on one of these blue squares, it'll give us the properties for each individual keyframe. So here is our X value, and it's a value of 0. It's at 1 second. The ease is default. And then the Y, nothing changed over here because it has the same values. It's 0 at 1 second, because it's the values of the keyframes on the timeline. And then if we come over here to this pencil icon down in the timeline panel, it says editing mode. And if we click it, it highlights it. And all of this stuff gets highlighted as well. That's because we can change all of its properties. So I'm going to click on the X value at 1 second, because the X value at 0, I want to remain at 0. And then when the timeline starts, when it counts up to 1 second, I want to give it a new value. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can come over here and click and drag this out, and you see there's a line connecting from where it starts to where it ends. And I'm going to undo that And it looks like I undid my keyframe here. So I'm going to go ahead with my playhead on 1 second, add another one. I must have hit undo too many times. So I'm going to click on the X value again. And this time I'm going to come over here to its properties. And if you put your cursor inside the value area here and click and drag up and down, you can drag the value up and down. So 0 is right here because this is where our timeline is starting. And now it is at 61 pixels and 85 pixels and so on. So I'm going to go out to, let's say about 160. So I can just highlight this and type in 160 and it moves it right into place. And now if I hit play right here on the timeline panel, it shows it takes 1 second to move from here to here. Now the playhead's going to keep playing until it reaches whatever we set it on. And you'll notice that my cursor now has a red circle with a line through it. That means you can't adjust anything. All you can do is hit stop or wait till the playhead finishes. Okay, so let's move our playhead to 2 seconds. And I'm going to come over here and hit this plus icon again and get a new set of keyframes. If we click on this X value, it has a value of 160 and it's at the 2 second mark. So what's going to happen if I hit play, it's going to move to that 160 and it's not going to do anything else because the value doesn't change. So let's change the value of our X. I'm going to move it out a little further. Let's say 290. And then I'm going to click on the Y value of this keyframe and notice it's still at 0 and I'm going to make it go down. So that's 88. I'll even that out at 90. Okay, and if we hit play. So now you can get an idea of how you can manipulate the X and Y value in increments. Now I'm going to play this again and I want to look at something. It seems to me a little quick. I think it's moving a little fast. I'm trying to picture my player jumping on it and then it taking off and going through the path. I don't want it to move too quickly. So I'm going to move my 1 second to, I'm just going to click and drag the node, the black little circle there, to 1.5. And then I'm going to drag this out to 3. Now it takes 1.5 seconds to get from each point. And if I play, I think that's a little more subtle. Okay, I'm going to move out here to, let's say 4.5, because that's 1.5 seconds from 3 seconds. And I'm going to click on our little plus icon and get us a new set of nodes. And if we click on the previous X value, we get a 290. And then if we click on our brand new one, we have a X value of 203. That's because our platform object was left in this location when I added the new keyframes. So if I highlight this X, our brand new one, and I come over here and I change it, you can see that it is a brand new node. It was just over here in the middle of this part of the timeline. Checking to make sure where your object is before you add a new node can be pretty helpful, and sometimes it could be very confusing if you're not aware that it does that. Okay, I want this to come straight out this way, but our Y value is 30, but I want it to be even here. So our previous Y value is 90. So if I click on our brand new Y value and just change that 30 to a 90, now it's even with the last node that we put in. So I'm going to highlight the X again, and I want to drag this out a little further. In fact, we can use the X value of our second node because we know this one starts at 0. I want to find out what this one is. That would be this node right here, and it's 160. So if I made it, say, twice as long as that, it would be 320. So I can come to the X value of this one, 290, and add the total of, what did we say, 320? So 320 plus 290 is 610. So I can highlight this X and just type in 610. So now this line right here from here to here is twice as long as this line. So if we play that, we have smooth movement and then it gets really fast. And that's because we are using a timeline. Every change in value that we make is based on time. So something that is twice as long in distance is going to move twice as fast if we place it the same amount apart on our timeline. So what we would need to do is make sure that from this node to this node, that it takes twice as long as it does from this one to this one. So if this is a second and a half, then second and a half times 2 would be 3 seconds. So from 3 seconds, we would need to go all the way out to 6 seconds. So let's grab that last node and drag it out to 6 seconds. So now when we play, we have a much smoother movement along our path. So I wanted to be able to show you that the changes we're making are based on time. Okay, moving on. I'm going to go to a second and a half past our 6-second mark. That puts us at 7.5. I'm going to add a new set of keyframes. And this time, I want my X value to stay the same, and I want to move my Y up the screen. Now we knew that it was 160 from our start point to the first node. So if we get our Y coordinate here, 90, we can subtract 160, and that'll give us the same distance going upwards. So if we come over here and say 90 minus 160, we get negative 70. And it shows us that that's how far it goes. So if I press play, now we maintain that same speed throughout our path, which is what I'm going for here. All right, I'm going to go out another second and a half here. That put us at 9, and I'm going to add another keyframe, and I'll highlight our X, and I'm going to come over here and drag this across. We could actually type this in. So over here we have 610, and we could come back 160. That's our second and a half that we've been using. So half of 160 would be 80, and then 160 plus 80 would be 240. So if I took 610 minus 240, and we could actually type that in just like that. So I'm going to highlight our brand new X keyframe and highlight in here and type in 610 minus 240. That gives us 370. So what we have here is one that's not quite as long as this one. Remember, this was double the length of our first one, which was 1.5 seconds to go 160. Then we did 3 seconds to go 320. So to travel evenly at a consistent speed from here to here, this one is going to be 2.5 seconds. So from here, this would be a half second to 8, and then 9:10 would be 2.5 seconds. So I'm just going to drag this out to 10. And then if we play, we are keeping that distance or that speed pretty consistent throughout. Okay, let's come out here to 12 would be 2 seconds. And I think that's what I'm going to go with. So let's add another keyframe, and I'm going to get our X, make it right about there, and then let's get the Y, and we can move it to right about there. And in fact, I'm going to go back to my X and move it a little further out, maybe something like that. I'm going to put that at an even 160. Let's get our Y, we go an even 100 there. So this is pretty long, and I'm taking a guess. We know that this was 2.5 seconds, so I'm going to go, we're at 2 seconds right here. I'm going to go another half second and see if that works. So this one I'm not doing the math on like I have the others. I just want to show you that you can eyeball this as well. And it looks like it goes a little quick there at the end. So I'm going to drag it out one more half a second to 13. And I think that's going to do good. Okay, I like that a lot better. Okay, one last keyframe. I'm going to go 1.5 seconds out to 14.5, and I am going to add a new keyframe, and I'm going to take that X, and I'm going to drag the point all the way back to even with this one. And we know this is where it started, so that's going to be an X value of 0. So I'm going to just type in 0 and see it's flush with the X value of this one. And then the Y I want to be the same as our previous one, which was 100. So let's highlight our new Y, highlight that, and just type in 100. And there's our path. So let's play this one more time, and you can see it's going through our timeline, and it's going to show up here on our screen any second now. There it is, to 13. Now, when it gets done with the path, the playhead keeps going. That's because we are at 20 seconds. So it finished the full 20 seconds before it quit. And our object just stayed there because there was no more information for it. So 14.5 is where we end, and you can see that over here. That's where the playhead is located, 14.5. So total time, I'm going to change that to 14.5 because when it gets to that last point, I want the timeline to end. If I play this and I jump on it, absolutely nothing happens because nowhere in our code do we tell our timeline to start. And if we come over here to our plat path object, these fields are still highlighted, and that's because our timeline is still in edit mode. I'm going to click and unhighlight it, and it turns editing mode off. So now I can move this object around the screen and not mess with the keyframes and their values down here. But I'm going to leave it right there in the same place we started with. So the way that we get our object to follow the path is going to be through code. And we're going to need to tell it to follow a path. So with it selected, let's go over here to the properties and edit behaviors and add a new behavior. And if we scroll down, we have one under movements called MoveTo. We can add that. Now our object has the MoveToBehavior over here. I'm going to leave everything as it is right now except for set angle. We do not need that because then the angle of the object will change as it follows the path. And I want it to remain horizontal. Okay, let's go over to the event sheet, and here's our orbit code from the previous video. I'm going to close that group up, and I'm going to right click and add a new group. I'll just call this one path. So how I want this to work is I want this platform to just sit there until the player jumps on to the object. So we're going to need to know, is the player on the path or not? So we're going to give our path object here an instance variable. So over here in the properties, let's edit instance variables, add new variable, and I'm going to call this state. This is going to be what state is our path in. And I'm going to change the type to a string. So when our player jumps onto the path, I want our state variable to change. So let's add an event to our path group, and I am going to go into our player and scroll down to on collision with another object, and I'm going to choose the plat path object. So when we make contact with the plat path object, we can go ahead, add an action, get our platform object, scroll down, and let's set the value of our new state instance variable to start. And just type in start in between two quotation marks. So let's decide what happens when this state is set to start. Add an event to path, go into our object, and scroll down to compare instance variable. And our state is equal to start. And then with all of this highlighted, let's Control C to copy, Control V to paste. So in the second one, let's double click into it and change start to end. Okay, so what happens when we start? Well, we want it to move. So let's add an action, get our object, and let's scroll down to that MoveToBehavior we put in. So we have MoveTo up here and MoveTo properties. I want MoveTo, and we have one over here, move along a timeline. Well, that's perfect. We have a timeline. So let's choose that one. Now we have all the timelines that are in our project are going to be in here. We only have the one, and we renamed it Path Follow 01. So that's the one we want. You could give it an ID if you needed to reference the timeline somewhere else in your code. We're not going to get into that today, so I'm going to leave that blank and hit done. So this is not going to work. We can play, and nothing happens. We did make contact with our object, our platform object, and we did tell it to move along the path or the timeline. Why is it not doing it? Well, up here on collision, it has that green arrow next to it. That means this is only detected once. It sets the state to start once, and that's fine. But once our state is start, this is basically a loop happening here. It's while this is start, this is going to happen until this is not true. So what's happening is at 60 frames per second, the game engine is trying to tell this path to move along the timeline. So it's starting over every single frame of the game. We only want it to tell it to move along the path once. So if we highlight this whole block of code, press B on the keyboard, that'll give us a sub-event. What we can do is double click, go into System, and type in trigger once while true, and then move our action down into that block. Now when we play, we jump on it, and it moves through our timeline. Now it's still a little quick. You could go back in and extend the length of the timeline and spread those keyframes out so that it takes longer to get from one point to the next. But I'm gonna just call this one good for now. So you saw when it got to the end, it just stopped. So I'm kind of modeling this after the Mario Brothers style of side-scrolling platformer. So when it gets to the end of the path, I want it to stop and then just drop off the screen. So that's where this end state is going to come in. There is a check in the MoveToBehavior that we can look for. So I'm going to click this block right here, and it's going to highlight the entire block of code. And I'm going to press B to get another sub-event, and it's going to place it below our trigger once while true. And then we can double click in this part and go into our path and scroll down to the MoveToBehavior, and we have one that says is moving. So let's put that one in, and with it highlighted, press I on the keyboard, and it puts this little X there. It inverts it. So now this says when it's not moving. We know that when we set it to start, it's going to start moving. But when it gets to the end, it stops moving. So this will be true, and then we can set our state to end. So let's add an action here. Go into the path object, scroll down, set value to our state. In between the quotation marks, let's say end. Now this won't do anything because there's no code here. It's just going to change the variable, and the platform object is just going to sit there. But when it reaches the end, I want it to immediately start just dropping off the screen. So we can add an action, go get our object again, scroll down to the move to, since we already have this behavior in there, and I want to move to position. So we can give it a new X and Y coordinate for it to move to. And I want it to start wherever this object is on screen. I want it to start right where it is. I'm going to plug that into the X coordinate by using self, and you can see it brings up the green square that we have for our path object. So I want self.x, and then do the same for the y. I want it to start at self.y, but then I want the y to change because I want it to move down. And in X and Y coordinates, y increases by value when it moves down screen. So I'm going to say self.y plus, and for the purpose of this project, I'm just going to say 500. Plus 500, that's going to move it down screen 500 pixels. Let's play that. And when I jump on it, it starts, it moves along the path. And then when it ends, it stops and just drops off screen. That is a quick little way that we can make a platform follow a path. And once you get the hang of how the timeline works, this can actually get put together very quickly. I just took a long time to explain it because I wanted to make sure that you get familiar with how it works in Construct 3 because it can be a little unfriendly user-wise. That concludes the platform moving along a path. I hope at least one of these first 3 videos in this series have given you something to work off of. If you are not subscribed to the channel yet, please go ahead and do so. Hit that big red button. Might as well hit the thumbs up while you're at it. You can check out the links in the description below. My new Discord channel is up and running, and if you have any questions about this or any other video on my channel, feel free to either leave it in the comments or you can go to the Discord and we can talk about it there as well. That is going to do it for me for this one. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.